My name is John. I am 38 years old, and I have worked as a security guard in various places for more than a decade. Now I supervise a surveillance team in a shopping center in Los Angeles. It is a job that has given me some stability. Although I have seen dangerous situations, my training has prepared me to deal with them. However, what I experienced recently left me with a feeling that I still cannot shake. As if for the first time in a long time, I had faced something much darker than my training. It all started one afternoon. It was Friday, and the shopping center was full of people as always on those days. Families shopping, teenagers walking, and employees in their routines. Everything was going on normally. My shift ended at 9 at night, but in this job, the clock is never exact. Something always comes up last minute. A lost customer, a misunderstanding in the stores, or simply making sure that everything is in order. That night, I had left a little later than usual. It was around 9:30 when I finally said goodbye to my colleagues and walked toward the exit of the mall. The parking lot was almost empty, with only a few cars scattered here and there. I don't have a car, so my daily routine includes taking a taxi home. The streets of Los Angeles can be dangerous at night, but I have always been careful. I don't take random taxis. I prefer to use transportation applications that seem safer to me. However, that night something didn't fit from the beginning. While I was walking toward the area where I normally wait for my transportation, a yellow taxi stopped on the side of the curb. The driver was a middle-aged man with a cap that barely let his face be seen. He rolled down the window and called me, "Taxi boss?" he asked with a neutral smile. Normally, I would have rejected the offer and waited for my vehicle from the app. But that night I was tired and the taxi looked quite normal. There were visible license plates, and the driver seemed like a common man. Although something in my instinct told me not to do it, I decided to ignore him. After all, I had been living in this city for years and had learned to trust my common sense. "Okay, I'm going to Sunset Boulevard," I told him as I got into the back seat, closing the door behind me. The taxi driver nodded and started driving. At first, everything seemed in order. The car radio was on with a soft music station. The air conditioning was working well, and the city traffic had slowed down enough that the trip was quiet. However, a few minutes after leaving the shopping center, something began to feel bad. I noticed that the taxi driver did not take the usual route to my neighborhood. Instead of continuing along the main avenue, he turned into a darker side street, one of those narrow, poorly lit streets that I never used. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to avoid traffic, or maybe he knew of some detour. But as we moved forward, the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach grew. "Hey, boss, this is not the fastest way," I told him, trying to sound casual. The driver did not respond immediately. His hands were clinging to the steering wheel, and his face was mostly hidden by the shadow of his cap. The silence inside the taxi became suffocating. "I'm taking an alternate route. There's a lot of traffic on the main road," he finally answered, but something in his tone made me feel that it wasn't true. I looked out the window. We were in an area that I did not recognize, deserted streets and buildings that seemed abandoned. My breathing accelerated. I knew something was wrong. "I think I prefer to go the usual way," I told him, trying to stay calm. "I'm not in a hurry." The taxi driver didn't respond this time. Instead of stopping or correcting course, he accelerated slightly, as if he were determined to continue along that route. At that moment, my heart began to beat faster, and my safety instinct was activated. I remembered the stories I had heard about kidnapping taxi drivers in the city, and an intense cold ran through my spine. "Stop here," I ordered him firmly. "I'm going to get out." The driver still didn't respond. My hands started to sweat, and I looked around the taxi, looking for some way to get out, but the back doors were locked. I tried to open the door manually, but it wouldn't move. The clicking sound of the car's locks resonated in the silence, confirming what I already feared. I was trapped in that taxi. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Stop right now." The man didn't say anything. Instead, he pressed the accelerator, and the car began to move even faster through the dark streets of the city. The music from the radio continued to play in the background like a grotesque melody that contrasted with the panic I was beginning to feel. My mind began to race, looking for a way out. I tried to stay calm, remembering my training as a security guard. I knew I had to act quickly. My first thought was to call the police, but when I took out my cell phone, the driver turned sharply, causing the phone to slip out of my hands and fall to the floor of the taxi. I leaned over to pick it up, but the movement of the car made it difficult for me to reach it. "Stop!" I shouted now, with a voice full of desperation. The driver turned his head slightly, and for the first time I saw his eyes, cold, calculating, as if he was used to situations like this. It was not the first time he had done something like this, and I knew it. I finally managed to get my cell phone back, and with trembling hands, I dialed the emergency number. But before I could press call, the cab made another sharp turn, and the phone slipped out of my hands again, this time getting trapped between the seat and the door. Panic began to take over me, but I couldn't give up. I knew that if I didn't act quickly, things could end badly. My mind remembered something that I always carry with me. A small utility knife that I keep on my belt, a personal safety measure during my years in this job. It's not a big deal, but in a dangerous situation, any tool can be crucial. With my heart beating at a mile a minute, I came up with a plan. I knew I had to do something. When I turned again into another dark alley, I decided to act. "I told you to stop," I screamed, and with all my might, I slammed the knife against the door lock. I tried hard, hoping to break the mechanism or at least free it, and after a few seconds of tension, I heard a click. The lock jumped, and the door unlocked. The driver realized what I was doing and turned the car violently to try to destabilize it. I almost lost my balance, but I managed to hold on to the edge of the door. The car was still moving, but I was determined not to stay inside. With one last effort, I pushed the door open and jumped out of the moving taxi. I fell rolling on the asphalt, feeling the blow in every part of my body, but I was outside. The car accelerated even more, and I saw how the driver disappeared into the darkness, leaving a cloud of dust and fear behind. I was left lying on the street, bruised and sore but alive. I stayed there for a few seconds, trying to process what I had just experienced. The silence of the night enveloped me, and for a moment, I felt like the world had stopped. But the pain in my arms and legs brought me back to reality. I was safe, but as soon as I got up slowly, I limped towards the sidewalk. My cell phone was still in the taxi, but it didn't matter anymore. The important thing was that I had managed to escape. My thoughts were clouded as I tried to find my way to a safe place. I knew I had to call the police, but first, I needed to calm down and understand what had just happened. I walked through the deserted streets until I found a convenience store. I went in with my body full of scrapes and my mind full of fear. The manager looked at me strangely, but I didn't pay attention. I asked to use the phone and finally called the authorities. That night, while I was giving my statement at the police station, I understood something terrifying. I wasn't the only one. The officers told me about a series of similar incidents that had been happening in the city. Taxi drivers who kidnapped passengers, taking them to dark places to rob them or, worse yet, to disappear them. I was lucky to have gotten out of that situation alive, but since then, my perception of safety changed forever. Every time I leave work and have to take a taxi or ask for transportation, I feel a knot in my stomach, a shadow of what I experienced that night. And even though I try to move forward, knowing that I was one of the few who managed to escape, I can't help but think of others, those who did not have the same luck. If you are enjoying the stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Brian, and I have worked as a civil engineer in San Francisco for more than 15 years. My days are usually long and exhausting, filled with meetings, project supervision, and visits to construction sites in different parts of the city. Traffic, travel times, and the constant pressure of work often make the days endless, which is why, like many in this city, I have come to depend on taxis and transportation applications to move quickly. I have a car, and although I am very careful with taxis, a recent experience showed me how fragile the sense of security one has when getting into a stranger's car can be. It was a Monday night around 10:30 when I found myself waiting for a taxi outside a meeting in the Marina District. It had been an especially long day. We had been reviewing the project at work since the morning, and then I had to attend a meeting with some clients until late. Fatigue invaded me, and the only thing I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and go to bed. I checked my transportation app, but the prices were through the roof due to high demand at that time. I didn't feel like waiting or paying more, so I decided that for once, I could take a traditional taxi off the street. I saw a taxi that was a white car with blue stripes slowly approaching along the avenue, one of those old models that still circulate in the city. The driver, a middle-aged man with a thin beard and a short-brimmed hat, waved at me as if he knew me. "Where are you going, young man?" he asked with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I responded that I was heading to the Sunset District, showing him the exact address. "Get in. I'll take you quickly," he said, and although I hesitated for a second, I was so tired that I decided not to think about it too much. I got into the back seat, and the car started with a small noise. At first, everything seemed normal, the typical San Francisco taxi, the noise of the engine, the sounds of the traffic still in the streets, and the music coming from the radio. The man seemed friendly, although not too talkative, which was a relief because I wasn't in the mood for small talk. I just wanted to get home. However, as the minutes passed, something started to feel strange. The driver didn't seem to follow the usual route I took to go home from the Marina District. Instead of continuing along the main avenue, he turned down secondary streets and then another one, further and further away from the main avenues and deeper into less illuminated neighborhoods. At first, I thought he was trying to avoid the traffic, but something didn't add up. The streets we were going on weren't routes that I recognized. It wasn't the first time I took a taxi from that area, and I knew more or less which roads were the fastest. The one he was taking wasn't. "It's faster here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Although discomfort was beginning to take over me, the man looked at me briefly in the rearview mirror with a strange smile on his face. "Don't worry, young man. I know all the shortcuts in the city," he responded without offering any further explanation. My instinct began to alert me. That tone made me worried, and that smile did not inspire confidence in me. I decided not to confront him directly, but I began to be more alert. I took out my cell phone and discreetly opened the map application to see where we were going. My worst fear was confirmed. We were going in the opposite direction to my house. Instead of heading towards Sunset, we were deep in an area that I did not recognize well. A narrow, industrial zone where the streets were deserted and there was hardly any light on the corners. "Hey, I don't think this is the right road," I said this time more firmly. The driver didn't respond immediately. Instead, he accelerated slightly, just enough for the car to pick up more speed than I would have liked on those narrow streets. My heart started racing. It was clear that something was not right. I leaned forward a little, trying to stay calm, but it was already clear to me that I had to get out of that taxi as soon as possible. "Stop here," I told him, trying to sound authoritative. "I'd rather get off." The man smiled again, showing his teeth, but he didn't slow down. "We're almost there," he said, as if he knew something that I didn't. My mind raced. I had to do something. I quickly checked the back doors, but the locks were on, and there was no way to open them from the inside. I knew that in some old taxis, the drivers modify the doors so that they cannot be opened from the inside, a tactic used by thieves or people who want to kidnap their passengers. I felt a wave of panic run through my body. I was not sure what intentions this man had, but one thing was clear. He was not going to take me home. My mind remembered the stories I had heard that circulated on social media and the news about taxis that kidnapped people to assault them, or worse yet, for much darker purposes. I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this, but now it was real, and I was in it. With trembling hands, I surreptitiously tried to open the emergency application on my cell phone, but the driver noticed it. "Don't use the phone," he said with a coldness that made my blood run cold. "You don't want to make this more difficult, right?" My heart started to pound in my chest. There was no longer any doubt. I was in danger, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I knew I had to act quickly if I wanted to get out of there. With my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, trying not to show panic, I started to think of a way to escape. "I just want to get out of there," I said, trying to calm my voice and sound as neutral as possible. "I don't feel well." The man didn't respond, but his hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly, and I noticed that he was starting to look for something in the front glove compartment with one hand. Panic invaded me completely. I didn't know what he was looking for, but nothing good could happen. At that moment, the only thing I could think about was how to get out of the car. I remembered that in some taxis, although the rear door locks were locked, the windows could still be lowered manually. I decided to try my luck. "Please stop here," I insisted, trying to distract him while my left hand surreptitiously began to turn the window handle. Much to my relief, the window began to roll down slowly. The driver didn't seem to realize what I was doing, still focused on whatever he was looking for in the glove box. When the window was low enough, I saw my chance. The car slowed down into a corner, and without thinking twice, I propelled myself towards the window and jumped out of the moving car. It wasn't a clean jump. I felt my knees hit the pavement hard. I rolled a couple of times, feeling the pain in my body as I hit the ground, but I was outside. The taxi continued to advance a few meters before stopping abruptly. I could see how the driver got out of the car and shouted something, but I didn't stay to listen. I limped as best I could and ran in the opposite direction without looking back. My heart was beating so hard that I could barely hear my own footsteps. I didn't know exactly where I was, but I saw a convenience store in the distance, a light that shone like a beacon in the middle of the darkness. I ran toward it, gasping with pain spreading throughout my body, but fear gave me the strength not to stop. When I got to the store, I collapsed on the floor next to the entrance, breathing hard. The manager came out immediately, worried, and I asked for help. With trembling hands, I dialed the emergency number on his phone and, in a whisper, explained what had happened. They arrived a few minutes later, although to me it felt like hours. I gave them the description of the taxi and the driver, but in a city as big as this, I knew that finding him would be difficult. The important thing was that I had managed to escape, although I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had not acted that night. As I sat on the edge of the sidewalk catching my breath, I realized how close I had come to ending that night in a much worse way. Since then, my perspective on getting into a taxi in this city changed. I no longer see each passenger as a simple source of income, and I am always alert, attentive to the signs that may indicate that something is not right. Being a taxi driver in San Francisco has always been a complicated job, but after that night, I know that you can never be too careful. My name is Paul, and I have been a taxi driver in Chicago for more than 20 years. Like anyone who has worked in this city, I know how to drive a taxi. Here it is not just a matter of knowing the streets well. You have to have patience, instinct, and a good dose of luck to avoid the problems that sooner or later are going to come your way. I have taken all types of passengers, from stressed executives to lost tourists, and even dating couples in the middle of an argument. But without a doubt, the most complicated are usually the drunks. Driving someone who is out of control due to alcohol can be a difficult task. But what happened to me a few months ago surpassed everything I had experienced until then. On a Friday night, it was almost midnight, and I had been driving for more than 10 hours. Fridays are always busy days. People leave work, go to parties, or have dinner with friends. When they can't drive anymore or don't feel like walking, they call a taxi. The traffic in the areas near bars and restaurants is hellish, but for taxi drivers, those nights are usually the most profitable. So despite the fatigue, I decided to continue driving for a couple more hours, hoping to pick up 1 or 2 more passengers before returning home. I was in the Wicker Park area, one of the busiest spots due to the city's nightlife. The bars and restaurants were full, and the streets were bustling with young people looking for fun. While I was slowly driving down an avenue, waiting for someone to call me, I saw in the distance a man making desperate signs, standing on the street corner. He was staggering a little, with his shirt badly buttoned and his face red. There was no doubt that he was drunk. At first, I hesitated to stop. Dealing with a drunk passenger was not what I felt like most at that moment. But I also knew that it was part of the job and that on many occasions, drunks just wanted to get home and didn't cause much trouble. So I decided to stop next to him. "Taxi, boss," I asked, rolling down the window. The man staggered towards the car, almost tripping over the curb. He looked to be in his 40s, with disheveled hair and the typical expression of someone who has drunk too much. His breath of alcohol was unmistakable, and his eyes could barely focus on me. Yes, taxi. Please take me to Lincoln Park," he stammered with a clumsy tongue. I nodded, trying to hide my discomfort, and I opened the back door for him to get in. I saw him struggle to have balance while he got into the car, and when he finally managed to get comfortable, he sighed heavily, as if the simple act of sitting had exhausted him. I started the taxi and drove down the avenue. Lincoln Park was not too far away, but with the traffic at night, I estimated that the trip would take about 20 minutes. I tried to concentrate on the road, but I couldn't ignore the noises coming from the back seat. The man was muttering unintelligible things. He was talking to himself, and from time to time, he would let out a nervous laugh. At times it seemed like he fell asleep, but then he would start babbling something incoherent again. "Friend," he said suddenly, leaning forward enough so that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Do you know what happened to me today? It was horrible." "Oh yes," I answered without taking my eyes off the road. "What happened to you?" It wasn't that I was really interested in his story, but after so many years of experience, I knew that sometimes simply listening to a drunk passenger could avoid problems. If you kept them talking, they relaxed, and the trip was calmer. "My wife left me today," he continued, his tongue tangled. "She left with another guy. Imagine. After so many years, so many sacrifices, and she leaves with another one." He hit the seat with his fist, although without much force, and then leaned back, letting out a sigh. I sighed internally. I had heard many stories like that. Spite, betrayal, relationship problems. It wasn't the first time someone had vented to me while drunk. "That sounds difficult," I said, trying to sound empathetic. although my mind was already thinking about how quickly I wanted to end that trip. But I'm sure things will get better.
No.
You don't understand, he shouted suddenly, hitting the seat harder this time. It's just that she left me with nothing. I know she took everything from my house, my money, my car, everything. His voice broke, and for a moment I thought he was going to start crying. The atmosphere in the taxi became heavier. I tried to stay calm as I turned a corner, waiting for him to calm down. But instead, his sadness turned into a kind of deranged euphoria. But it doesn't matter anymore, he shouted, laughing for no apparent reason. You know why? Because I showed everyone who's boss. That's what I did today. My heart began to beat faster. The way he said it, the tone of his voice, everything indicated that he was talking about something serious. What kind of surprise? I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The man looked at me in the rearview mirror, and his smile widened. Something they will never forget, he murmured. You know, today I stopped by the office after having a few drinks. They didn't let me in, of course. The damn guards kicked me out. But that didn't stop me. No, I didn't go in through the back. I broke a window and left something for them. Something that will explode when they least expect it. My hands began to sweat on the steering wheel. What the hell was this guy talking about? Maybe he had left a bomb or something. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But his expression and the way he spoke were serious enough to be more than just a drunken hallucination. I tried to think quickly. I couldn't just leave him to his fate knowing what he had just told me. If what he was saying was true, someone could be in danger. But I couldn't confront him directly either. Not in his state, he was unpredictable, and I didn't know what he was capable of. I decided that the best thing would be to try to get more information out of him while I thought about what to do. That sounds intense, I said in the calmest voice I could muster. And what exactly did you leave behind? The man laughed out loud. You'll never know that, my friend, he said, pointing at me with his index finger while wobbling in the seat. I'll just tell you that when it happens. Oh wow, everyone will know. My mind was racing a mile an hour. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to provoke him directly. So I made a decision to stray slightly from the path and stop at a gas station, pretending that I needed to fill up with fuel. Hey, do you think I can make a quick stop at the gas station? I asked, trying to sound carefree. Whatever you want, friend, whatever you want, the man responded, laughing once again and leaning back in the seat. I drove to the nearest gas station, trying not to show how nervous I was. As I approached the gas pump, I saw a police officer patrolling near the entrance. That was my chance. I stopped the car next to the pump, turned off the engine, and quickly got out. Just a moment, I told the man. I was going to get gas. The man didn't seem bothered. He was too drunk to realize what was happening. I approached the policeman with quick and discreet steps, trying not to attract the attention of the drunk in the car. I need help, I whispered urgently. My passenger is drunk and just confessed that he left something dangerous in his office. I don't know if he's joking or not, but I'm worried it might be true. The policeman looked at me with surprise at first, but then he nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. He immediately called on the radio to his companions and asked me to return to the car while he approached cautiously. I returned to the taxi and sat in the driver's seat, trying to act normally. The drunk did not seem to have noticed anything. He continued talking, laughing from time to time, and mumbling about what he had done in the office. A few minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived at the gas station. The police officers discreetly approached the car, and one of them leaned toward the passenger window. "Good evening, sir," the officer said in a firm voice. "Could you come with us for a moment?" The man raised his head in confusion, but before he could react, The police took him out of the car carefully. The man tried to resist at first, but he was too drunk to put up much resistance. They handcuffed him and took him to the patrol car while I sat in the taxi, feeling how the tension in my body began to dissipate. They passed a few minutes before the officer came back and explained the situation to me. Turns out that after taking the man to the station, they investigated more about his story. In the end, it turned out that he had destroyed some things in the office but had not left any bombs. It had all been an exaggeration of his drunken mind. However, the authorities detained him for the damage caused and for reckless driving in his condition that night. While driving back home, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I realized that although it had just been a delusional story from a drunk man, the fear and uncertainty were real. Sometimes, drunk customers are more than just nuisances. They can be dangerous to themselves and others. Since then, I have learned to be much more cautious with the passengers I pick up, especially those who are not of sound mind. You never know when one night, a calm situation can turn into an out-of-control event.